welcome back to the Roxy Horror Picture Show. Today we're going to talk about something serious that happened back in 1980 in Galway. So it starts off on the 3rd of June 1980. There was a couple that was parked down by South Park after hours of a pub. Now, South Park was where people drove down and they fooled around, you know yourself. Well, this couple was fooling around in a car. And this bloke turned up, banged on the window with a gun and shouted at them and threatened, says, move down 30-40 yards away from here. They obviously lost their lives. He wound up the window and he sped off like a good thing. The only thing is, that was the start of what was going to be a brutal night. Across from South Park there was Grattan Road, where there was a strip of houses. And in one house there lived a lady called Mary Kit. Mary Kit was in her bedroom in the early hours of the 3rd of June 1980, where she heard a sound. The terrified 45-year-old stared towards her bedroom window, and that's where she seen a figure of a man. And she was absolutely terrified. So she was in the house by herself. And he roared at her, demanded money. Now, she said that her bag was downstairs, which it was in the kitchen, and he went down. He went down to the bag and he pulled out a tenner. Now, beside her bag was a load of knives. Do you know, the steak knives and everything, the knife display? Well, he grabbed one of those anyway, and he went upstairs to threaten her. As this man was downstairs, Mary's heart was thumping. She was begging that she'd hear him leave the back door, but he didn't. She stood up and she grabbed her dressing gown and wrapped herself up. As she was walking out towards the bedroom door, he was walking in with this knife and he threatened her. But as he threatened her, she looked at him. She knew instantly who he was, as he lived in the same row of houses as her. She goes, "You're Michael Holian." Michael went towards her, grabbed her by the throat, stabbed her in the side, piercing her kidney. The two of them fell. He seen there was an ashtray beside the bed. He grabbed the ashtray and he continuously pounded her in the back of the head. He got up. He was about to leave. As he was about to leave, he heard her coughing. So it wasn't bad enough that he destroyed the poor woman. He went back to finish off the job and he strangled her to death. After he done that, weirdly enough, he made the bed. I don't get that. But he did. He made the bed and he put a towel or blanket over her head. She was lying down face to the ground with her hands tucked in underneath her. And he kind of pushed her slightly under the bed and he left through the back door. Now, Mary Kit spent most of her adult life working for the Connacht Tribune. She started there in 1954 and worked there happily for 26 years. An only child, and her parents long since passed away. She lived in a 2-storey house there in Grattan Road, overlooking Galway Bay. It was a house where she had grown up, where she felt safe and secure. Although never married, she did have a wide group of friends. Mary had so many friends, and she enjoyed living life to the full. She was always out with the girls, and she was always said that she was the life and soul of the party. The Sunday night before her murder, she was there in a pub, local pub, singing away while her cousin played the piano. She's quite an attractive woman. Although she wasn't shy, she was quite modest. And there was always men asking for her, but she always declined. In fact, the night before her murder, she was asked out by a man and she politely declined. She was in a relationship 20 years before that, and after that relationship broke down, she never found love again, sadly enough. But she always had her friends. She never felt lonely. She always had her friends to back her up. She always had her girls' nights out. She was also very active in the musical society and the local drama schemes. In fact, a year before she passed, she was down in Knock, helping all the elderly and the disabled be able to see the Pope, make sure that they were comfortable and they had a great view of when the Pope came to visit. She was just such a selfless, lovely woman who always put everybody and her community first. Mary went to the 7:30 p.m. Mass in Galway City on the 2nd of June 1980. She left at 8:05 and was walking down Dominic Street towards Grattan Road. And that's where she bumped into one of her neighbours, Eamon Fitzpatrick. She was very, very fond of the Fitzpatricks. She was very, very great friends with Teresa Fitzpatrick, which would have been his wife. Now, when he bumped into her, he was on his way to the pub to have a few pints, and he asked Mary, would she mind, when she got home, just saying to Teresa where he was? And she said that's no bother at all. When Mary got back, Yvonne, which would be Eamon and Teresa's daughter, was at the house. She was house sitting the house. In fact, she'd always be there, even just to keep Mary company sometimes. And she said to Yvonne, go on, you might as well go home. I'm home now. When you go home, make sure you tell Teresa that Eamon has gone out for a few pints. So she did. She went home. But even then, Mary still rang Teresa. It was something that she'd done every evening, you know. Even though they weren't around each other, they were still talking. Just ringing a friend, having a catch-up, I suppose. So she rang Teresa anyway, and they were looking forward to a night out the next night. Herself, her cousin Mary and Teresa were going to go for dinner and have a few pints and just have a catch-up and have a laugh. So she was on the phone talking about it, saying how excited she was. She couldn't wait for it. And they had their good nights and they said goodbye and hung up. But unfortunately, no. The next day, Mary never turned up for those drinks because she was murdered. Now, Teresa didn't know, and neither did Mary. They didn't know. They were wondering where she was. She always kept in touch to make sure that the plans went ahead, but they heard nothing from her that day. So Mary and Teresa, her cousin Mary, decided to go to the pub or to the restaurant and ask behind the bar, was Mary there? Was there any reservations made? And they found out that there wasn't. So they knew something was up. So the two of them went back to Teresa's house and they decided to ring the Connacht Tribune to find out, was she still working? Because sometimes, you know, the hours would be ridiculous. But they informed them that she never turned up that day. And they knew that wasn't like Mary at all. So they decided to go to the house. Eamon, Mary, and who was it? It was Eamon, her cousin Mary, and Teresa decided to go to the house to find out if Mary was even in. And when they went, all the lights were off and the door was locked. But of course, Yvonne from house sitting would have a spare key to the house. So they asked Yvonne to come up to bring the key. So Yvonne did. She came up, she brought the key. But the door was dead bolted from the inside. And that's when they decided, right, they'll go around the back. So they went around the back and the bathroom window was left open and there was a ladder close by. So they put the ladder up against, and Teresa went to climb because Eamon had a bad back, so it was best for Teresa to climb in through the window. And when she did, she looked around and she couldn't see anything. The lights were all off, the house was quiet, and she was just thinking, where in God's name is Mary? She heard a bit of noise downstairs, and as she went downstairs, she was like, hello? And there comes Eamon through the back door. It was actually open. They didn't think to check the back door. But then again, in Eamon's mind, he says, if she locks the front door, she's going to lock the back door. So he didn't really check until he checked after Teresa climbed through the window. So the pair of them started looking around the house, and they opened the front door also for the cousin Mary and Yvonne to come into the house. And the whole lot of them were looking around, and they looked upstairs. They couldn't see her at all. And then Eamon went downstairs and he went to ring the police. Well, the guards, sorry. And as he was about to ring the guards, he heard a scream from Teresa and he ran upstairs. Teresa just seen, just from the corner of under the bed, was Mary Kitt's body. Now, she reached in and she tried to find a pulse and she couldn't. And she did touch her and she was very, very cold. So she knew instantly that she was dead. And that's when Eamon ran back downstairs to ring the guards. And also ring for the local priest to come and bless the body. As she was very holy, it's something that us Irish would have done. Now, when the police arrived, they seen that she was dead. and they looked around, and there was a lot of blood surrounding her body. And as they turned her over, they seen her face was covered in blood, and there was a substantial amount of blood towards her lower back also, which is where she would have been stabbed. But they didn't see a stab wound, they just seen a mounds of blood. So forensics came, and when they came, they seen that the entry must have been the window, as that was open, and they seen fingerprints all around the window frame. And obviously they took dustings of it, they took the prints, and when they went into the room, they seen that obviously that the bed was made, and there was blood splatter. A lot of it was Mary's, some of it was unidentifiable persons, which we all know is Michael's, but they didn't know at the time. Now, while all this was going on, the next day, well, that night and the next day, Michael Holian was out drinking. Not even a bother, not even a care in the world. In fact, he tried to sell off these 3 gold coins, which 2 local drunks actually bought. And he was still messing at the bar. He was threatening people, playing pool. He just doing what scumbags do. He didn't give 2 shits. He didn't care whatsoever. Now, the police did do an announcement of the area to say, look, there was a murder at such and such a place, Grattan Road obviously. If anybody's seen anything suspicious or anything weird that night, please come forward. Any information would be grateful. So lo and behold, the people that were threatened with the gun that I said at the beginning of this story contacted the guards, and they said that a man came towards them with a pistol and threatened them to move. But the man also said that he recognised him from the Harbour Bar earlier on that night, and his name was Michael Holian. Michael Holian was well known to the guards for many, many years, for about 15 years previous. He had quite the rap sheet. Years and years and years before this, he assaulted, when he was 17, he assaulted a 10-year-old boy, and he also assaulted a 26-year-old woman, nearly strangling her to death, only for the fact that there was kids nearby. They shouted at him and he ran off scared, but the guards caught up with him. He did do time, a measly 12 months, which is ridiculous, but he did do time. He was also sent into the psychiatric unit many a times. He was just down and out. He had no hope. He just didn't care. He was just an alcoholic scumbag. All he wanted to do is rob and bait people, and it was just ridiculous. Anyway, like I says, he was well known to the guards, and unfortunately the guards couldn't keep a tag on him, even though he was known to be dangerous. They couldn't keep a tag on him. I suppose if they did, this wouldn't have happened to poor Mary, but it did. They got hold of Michael and they brought him in, and they interviewed him. Now, when they sat him down to interview him, he requested this one guard that would have been, I suppose, with him from the very start, from his first ever crime, that has always interviewed him, and they knew each other, I suppose, and he just wanted that familiar guard that he could confess to. So on the 5th of June, the guards contacted Brendan Moran, who was a detective at the time. He was the guard that Michael Holian said that he would confess all to. So Brendan, obviously, he knew him. He says that he's known him for many years. He was, I suppose, he knew that he'd be able to get it out of him. So he came down and he interviewed him. When he brought him in, he says, Michael, what have you done? What possessed you to do this to this woman, to poor Mary? And he says, I ran out of money. And I knew that she lived alone, so I went to rob, and it just went too far. Brendan says, were you drinking? He goes, I was drinking all night. And Brendan just made a comment and goes, is there anything we can do for you? Before they started the interview. And he turned round and he said, Just bring me out the back and shoot me. Like, he knew he was done. But this is the statement, I have a copy of it here, of what he said happened that night to Brendan. He said, I decided to break into a house because I needed money. I picked out Mary Kit's place because I knew she was living alone. I got in through a bathroom window and I went to the couple of rooms. I went into the front bedroom where Mary Kit was sleeping, and she woke up when she heard the noise of the door opening. She asked me what I wanted and I said money. And she told me her handbag was downstairs. I went downstairs and took a £10 note out of her purse. I got a knife from the side in the kitchen and I went back upstairs. Mary Kit was out of bed and she was in a nightgown. She said, I knew you. I know you. You're Holian. I had the knife in my hand and I went over to her and I put my arm around her neck and we both fell to the ground. I stabbed her in the side with the knife. I picked up the glass ashtray and hit her with it a couple of times in the head. I got 2 cuts on the palm of my hand. I started to get frightened and I was walking out of the bedroom door when I heard her coughing, and I went back over to her and I choked her. I pushed her underneath the bed. I made the bed and went downstairs. I threw the knife away on my way home. That was his statement. That's what he said that happened. He just didn't care. Like, oh God, the poor fella got frightened. Can you imagine how that poor woman felt? Never mind him. But anyway, they obviously took fingerprints from him when he got there and blood samples, and they all matched to the fingerprints and the unexplained blood at the scene. Now, as Michael was making his confession, poor Mary was being laid to rest amid heart-rending scenes after Mass in the Claddagh, where Mary had lived all of her life. Journalists and other members of staff of the Connacht Tribune formed a guard of honour for Mary as her coffin was being brought to the church. The next day, as her remains were being brought to the cemetery, the funeral halted outside the Connacht Tribune on Market Street, where prayers were held. She was very, very, very fond of her job. She just loved the buzz of the Connacht Tribune. And her loss is still very, very much felt there to this day by all staff that worked there at the time. On Monday, the 9th of February 1981, Michael was brought to court and he pled guilty and he was given life imprisonment for what he had done. The practice of the Central Criminal Court of that time was that there was no useful purpose to be hearing evidence at that time when the person in question pled guilty. So none of the public got to actually hear what he had done to her, all the gory details on what he had done to her and why he deserved life. They also didn't get to hear of the 2 previous assaults that he'd done to that 10-year-old boy and that 26-year-old woman. They also didn't get to hear how frustrated the guards were that they weren't able to keep tabs on such a violent person, as they didn't have resources. The public didn't get to hear a lot by the sounds of it. Some months after Holian was charged with the murder, there was a sheer panic throughout Galway. He requested for his belongings, or some of his belongings, to be given back that was taken away by the detectives of that case. So he was brought back to court to ask for them. As they were waiting, he managed to break free from his escorts and he fled. Now, the sad part of this, or karma as I'd like to put it, is that yes, he escaped. Yes, it took them a while to find them. I think he was gone for a full day. He had nowhere to go. He was found in the front garden. He had no friends, no family, no nothing. He was just found in the front garden of his family home. He had nowhere to turn to. So they just took him and he went straight back into the cells. Michael is now one of the longest serving prisoners in the state. He is currently housed in Castlerea. Every now and again he gets brought back into Galway with a load of guards to keep a hold of him this time, so we can visit his friends and family Well, not so much friends, but his family anyway. With him being locked up for the last 25 years, he is very, very pale, practically translucent, as he doesn't get much sun. So he looks very, very frail, very, very weak. And he's still apparently a notorious drinker, where they make that concoction, their jailbait hooch, or something like that it's called, where it's just mixed with a load of yeast and food colorants. Now, in 2004, he was moved from Castlereagh to a medium, well, not from Castlereagh, it was just to a more medium security part called the Grove. The Grove is basically houses in Castlereagh where they stay, and they literally have to cook and wash and everything for themselves. They house share, basically. It didn't last long. He's put in a house with a load of people from the IRA, and he mocked them during Easter and the way that they celebrate Easter. And when he done that, he was thrown back into where he came from in Castlereagh. Now, obviously that was a bit of a downer for him, because moving there gave him more likely to get parole. Well, tough. Karma. You don't get it. Anyway, well, unfortunately some people do, but he doesn't deserve it. From 1980 June, Connacht Tribune first reported the murder, and it made the first page. Well, obviously it would. I mean, it was one of their staff, but it made the first page. And how loved she was, and how they couldn't get over the shock. Every year since, they've put in a remembrance for Mary, where they not only just done the remembrance for her, but they also thanked all the guards, all the friends, and all the families that loved her. It's quite nice. They still do it to this day, every year. That is the story of Michael Holian and Mary Kitt. It is terrible. I feel so sorry for that poor woman. She was only 45, she was young. And by the sounds of it, she was well loved. And unfortunately, that is Galway, though. To this day, there's still many people like Michael Holian that get away with practically nearly murder. In some instances, in future stories, you'll see that some did get away with murder. And it wasn't until they murdered someone that was, I don't know, that would have been noticed. That's when the guards actually decided to do something. Galway, huh? Well, anyway, until next week, thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe at the end if you do like this video. Every subscribe button click makes such a difference. I'll see you next week.